everyone, welcome back to PommyInOz. Hope we're all doing really well. Please smash that like button, smash that subscribe button. We've got loads of content through and I'm really excited about this video. It's going to be a real nice prelude to what we call the mad, weird and wonderful part of the year. You can become a member of the channel as well. Please do that if you want to. It does support the channel out. It does help us do what we do. No obligation, but link is in the description. And the legends that have done that are in the old description. So thank you for doing that. And what we're doing today is we're going to do something really exciting. So a good mate of mine, big mate of mine, Tim, over in the States, what he does is he basically, he's a talent scout for an American club. He does college basketball, so he is really into depth charts. So we have quite a lot of conversations. We go way back, me and him. Used to coach him golf back in the day before he went to the wonderful America, so God bless him. But he knows nothing about football, so I came to him because I know that a big part of his role is doing depth charts. And to explain what he does is when you bring players into college basketball, it's not just about winning college basketball, but it's also about looking at NBA depth charts and trying to ascertain them skill sets to the kids you've got to give them the best opportunities. So the way that college basketball works, kind of like the NAB in a way, but I'd say it's a lot more advanced in the States, is their duty of care is getting their players onto a list and building their skill sets. And he kind of looks at the draft crop, looks at the list currently at the NBA and goes, right, okay, this guy here maybe has a chance at becoming the centre at this team. Let's work on these because that's what they're looking for. So he's tried to help us with that. It's been my eye and my data knowledge, and then he's got the raw data, and we've tried to come up with it. And then what we've done on top of that, well, what I've done is I've gone back through all the best 4 lists of the last 20 years, tried to create a list profile based around that premise of how many players genuinely are on the list and what they look like. And then I've tried to correlate it to Carlton. So sounds a lot more confusing than it is. I've made myself look like a genius, but we'll go into it. So as you see it, make total sense. Honestly, it'll make total sense. I promise you that. So let's take a look at Carlton's list as it stands today, 7th of September at 1:30. Let's have a look. So what we've got here is basically Carlton's list makeup. So these are the contract signings. The guys in yellow are the ones that are meant to be out of contract. So as we know, Will Setterfield is pending. David Cunningham is pending. Caleb Marchbank, it's pending. Lachlan Fogarty. Some rumours he's got a contract, some is not. The best I can find is when we signed him, it was a 2-year deal going to the end of 2022. So unless there's one of them dodgy things the AFL do, and they've silently signed him, there is a lot of what they call categorised contracts. So what they do is it's a silent extension. Tom Papley would be a great example of that, the silent extension, when Carlton were negotiating as if he was a free agent, but they said that they had a player option or they had a club option where they automatically did it, so it was actually a 5-year deal and they hadn't announced it yet. So that's it. So that takes us roughly, if you keep the senior spots on, right, based as of now, bearing in mind Carlton haven't done anything higgledy-piggledy, that's 33 senior players, 4 category B, 4 cat A, 2 cat B. It's 39 players. If you look at the makeup next, you're allowed 36 to 38 senior players, 4 to 6 category A, up to 44. So basically, if you've got 36 senior players, you can have, and you'd be able to have up to 6 and then 2 category Bs, and that's how it works. There is some workarounds, Gold Coast. They're a little bit of a workaround. So roughly, for you guys watching at home, that means that there'll be 5 ins, roughly, based on now. So we've assumed that all them limbos have been re-signed. Obviously, that can change. We've also assumed that Ed Kerner's got the year deal in that, but he is also limbo. But that looks pretty stonewall by all reports. That leaves Carlton with pick 10, pick 28, 37. We've predicted it's going to be around there. I predict it will be just before the doggies in that start of the 3rd round. 62, 64 and 82 I've put an asterisk because obviously that's over what we do. What you may see with them bottom picks is someone's elevated and Carlton take a punt on a rookie deal. I can't see anything else. You may be looking at someone like Quenton. There isn't anyone coming through that's category B worthy in our academy. So there is a chance someone could go and be promoted. Someone like maybe Boyd, someone like Sam Durden may be promoted. I think that'd be a risk. Lockie O'Brien would probably be the favourite. But as it stands, the way Quenton have worded it, it's still a Cat A that he's on. So let's go and have a look at other things. So these are your key defenders. Now, what is really interesting about this is what that makeup is roughly just an indication of where they are. So looking at AFL lists, genuinely that's how it works anyway. Quenton have nailed that. They usually have 2 starting key defenders, 1 best reserve, and then in another category, when we go with the third defenders, they've got one that floats that would again be called best reserve in case of injury. And then they have a guy that they're waiting on. So Domaku, he's played back. He started to play a bit forward and in the rock. He would probably be that guy that you would consider you're waiting on, seeing how it is. So when you look at this, you would say that with Sam Durden re-signing today, that would probably put the Fisher McCasey rumours to bed. I can't see Quenton taking a punt. They may have a look at someone else who's very young, very raw, because some sides do have 2 waiting on, and with Domaku's versatility at the forward half of the ground as well, they may look at it that way, in the terms of, you know what, let's bring someone else. So you would say that that's pretty stone-walled, barring some miracle. It doesn't look like it's going to be too much different, if you know what I mean. Then we look at the very interesting category. So genuinely in the AFL, the third medium-sized tall guy is 1 starter. Now, we've gone there with best reserve because for Caleb Marchbank, I think he is best 22, and I think Quenton will genuinely play 2. That is all up in the air. So when we look at the last 10 top 4s, genuinely this is horses for courses. It's what the players and the club think. So Marchbank and McGovern we know can play in the same side, but obviously there you've got Brodie Kemp, and we've put Lockie Plowman in that waiting on category in the terms of that. I think he's a best reserve, but as a third defender, he plays more of that lockdown role, which really comes more into the lines of general defender. So the third defender in AFL today is more of an intercept. So you would say that if you were picking them, Mitch McGovern would be top of the tree. But this is where I want to allude you to, right? A big issue with Quenton list management. You want your best reserve to be someone that is fit 90% of the time. And when you've got Mitch McGovern and Caleb Marchbank in your top 2, because you would say both of these are green starters, bit of an issue there. Because if you are relying on Caleb Marchbank to be a key defender reserve, which, going back to that last spreadsheet, you probably need him to be, it's a risk. Would you back him in to be fit all year? Without it, it's blind faith, isn't it? And Plowman, we know the deficiencies. Would you want him to play? We saw how different Quenton were without Mitch McGovern and Caleb Marchbank when we didn't have a natural intercept. It's a lot. We look a lot more defensively frail when we're asking our key defenders to also play loose. So that is something to keep in mind, that Quenton may look at that avenue or back in the talent that they've got. Back in the talent they've got. So general defenders, now this is really interesting, right? Because genuinely here, because of how the other made up, Quenton's makeup is all of these are starters at the moment based on it. Because if they don't play Marchbank as that other, Boyd will play as that smaller back pocket lockdown, and Quenton float this. Now, this is very weird because when you look back, genuinely, they have 4 starters here in the AFL. And then one guy who is a starter, but he floats through other positions. So, this could be an argument. Sam Docherty, Zach Williams, Adam Saad does play a bit further up the ground. Nick Newman 2 years ago was trialled on the wing. This could be another area here that Quenton might look at and go, right, what are we doing here? So you would say that we have a lot of talent, and Quenton have jettisoned talent here. But the way our backline makeup is, I want you to go back to them guys that we were saying were next in line, were nil, that a lot of them are injured. And genuinely our backline injuries prove that this year. So this may be an area where someone like Hustwaite comes into the conversation. He can play on wing, can play on the ball, is a halfback as well. So Quenton then suddenly have that option. This is probably one of them grey areas. Tyrese Lau, who we've been talking about, may be one of them players as well. So this is an area that, although Carlton have exceptional depth in the terms of on-field depth, your reserves here that could play in here in case of emergency. Marchbank for the key defenders, but also in that third position. This would free one of these guys up. It's one of them areas there, do you know what I mean, that you are going to be robbing Peter to pay Paul, as we've seen Jack Noons was deployed in this position last year, much to the chagrin of many Carlton fans. So the way the list make up here, this is saying here that this area is very good, but the problem is all the depth plays. Who's the next cab off the rank in case of injuries, and how does that affect? So when you're building a tactic, this area here has to be fit, as the stats show. So very interesting, I thought, this part here, because that is where the depth is. The problem is the depth genuinely has two players that aren't playing, that are waiting in line. So it's a very interesting case in point. And what we've done is we've tried not to double people up on these sheets to make it more clear. But obviously, bit of common sense, there is players that can play this role as well. But I want to try and get home to you how important having that depth is for it. So then we go on to probably everyone's favourite, tastiest position, the midfielders. And these are the guys who genuinely are playing on the inside in their best role. So no qualms here. Genuinely what we see is there's 5 to 6 players. And if there is a sixth, that sixth player can play elsewhere. Now for Carlton, we're very luxurious. Cripps, Hewitt and Kennedy there genuinely play on the ball exclusively with very limited rest elsewhere. Sam Walsh and Cherra are about 65, 70, but they float. So that makes sense that Carlton have got a bit of outside capability, maybe a bit of half-forward capability. In George Hewitt's case, there is that half-back flank as well, because that's where he played a large part of time as well for Sydney, exclusively last year before we bought him, as they were trialling their younger players on the ball. Very interesting. Then you've got Will Setfield and Ed Kerner as the best reserves, and that's why I'm not against Ed Kerner staying on for another year, because if he can stay fit, which I do, I think it's just a very unlucky year for him. I know he's got an old man's injury, but the levels of fitness there from him are huge. But then you go down to these waiting ons. Lockie Foggett and Paddy Dow are way too old to be waiting on. So when you look, this is actually the AFL blueprint. 5 players that are just about there playing. 6 and 7 who can go on. 8, 9, 10. Genuinely players either who are very versatile, very utility-based, but also very young. And when I say very young, we're talking first, second year players where they're finding their roles. So this is probably an area that Carlton might surprise some people, may attack. And again, Huswaite comes into that conversation. Humphreys comes into that conversation. Hollands comes into that conversation even as well. He swaps inside, predominantly outside, but can pinch it there. So again, Carlton may be looking at that way. So that's a very interesting point of view, I think, and I was really excited about that. This is probably the area, though, that Carlton have. So genuinely here, with the AFL, they have 2 best reserve who may play and maybe a starter who can float. So Will Setfield comes into that conversation. Do I think he's a winger? No, I don't. Blake Acres, he's coming. So suddenly that makes that suitable. And then they have waiting on. Now, Sam Philp and Jack Carroll. Jack Carroll, is he an outside player? Is he an inside player? Is he a half forward? That is what Carlton have got to judge. He is very in that Sam Philp mode. As a junior, his numbers deceived where he was playing, and he was kind of chopping and changing. Now, I think Jack Carroll miles ahead of Sam Philp, and I think he will stay on. This is where Carlton probably want to get a bit tricky. Is David Cunningham an outside player? Is he even staying on? But genuinely, you need someone here who is a winger. So what we find is genuinely that makeup, the bottom 2 are very fit players. One's very young, one's very reliable. Maybe even some sides have sacrificed that halfback flank to have an extra here. So Carlton will have 3 predominantly starters, you would imagine. You'd imagine Cottrell is very versatile. Blake Acres, very defensive. It kind of works. So this is a very interesting position. And this is a position here that a lot of depth is in the midfield, both sides, outside and in. And you would say that not many sides would use Walsh and Cherra. That's why I haven't counted them here, because they're so dynamic in the guts. So very interesting point here. And this is a focal point, I would say, of the draft. A focal point and an area here that just when you look at the depth chart doesn't excite you, does it? And interesting as well, when we've looked at the analytics, particularly when my mate looked at the analytics, It's not much separating Cottrell and O'Brien when I explain to him that the differentials of roles, defensive and attacking, Cottrell is a lot more dynamic and attacking in that sense, so not much separating them. So very interesting, I thought, very interesting. Key forwards. Now this is an area here that is scary. Now Domaku has roamed there. Brodie Kent has gone high half forward. They trialled him at the key forward. More of a utility. He would probably be what every AFL club has, but he's not a key forward. This is an area that probably Carlton are playing a dangerous game. A real dangerous game when you look at this role, because the guys that you can suggest for me, J Sauce, not really a key forward. You're really sacrificing skill level. Could argue TDK, but again, you're sacrificing skill level. So I predict here, genuinely, this is where there is not very much depth in the AFL. But in the last 10 years, genuinely, there is a player that we're called waiting on, where we're building, or a first reserve, even that can ruck maybe. So this could be, again, why we talk about Isaac Keeler a lot on this show. Very key area here where Carlton don't have that depth. They don't have it. So very interesting there. Probably an area that Carlton will address in this off-season. Now, the half-forward here, genuinely what we're seeing here with the high half-forwards is we've got two players. Now, it's interesting. Jack Silvani's taken a knock because of all the ruck time. It's really warped his things. Zach Fisher has been sensational because he's played on the outside, he's played parts on the ball, but he is genuinely deployed at that higher area. And then Cunningham at the moment is the best reserve because that's where he played a lot of his football. This is another area that Carlton will be thinking Isaac Keeler, he could go into that role. These are areas now you're really getting into of, do you redevelop some of the small? So Jesse Motlop, he could come here. Do you know what I mean? Durden plays half of his football down in the back half of the game, which is probably a habit from when he was under 16. A lot of things that Carlton have got to put into perspective. But genuinely what we see here is we see two. And again, that third starter is a guy that you could see elsewhere. And then some waiting on players. And this is where you see a large crux of waiting on players. Carlton generally have a lot of waiting on players in the inside position over the last 5 years, which is an undynamic list. Now, I can't speak for Sauce. Did Sauce just draft a fuckload of midfielders and go, at one point we'll get rid of them? That's a question for Sauce, not me. But this is where, again, Carlton will probably think, you know what? We've got the depth if we move someone and then look elsewhere. So, again, this would be an area that Carlton will be thinking, right, we're relying on a lot of players to stay fit. And I always say, if you see your best reserve, your backup is a guy that's injury prone, big issues, because this is where you're changing people around. We saw the lack of Jack Silvani from last year playing at high half forward. Jack Martin being injured, we saw this, and then it was kind of like higgledy-piggledy. These are areas that really do affect tactically. So really interesting observations there. The rucks here, this is just normal. The difference is with Carlton is their age profile of rucks is bizarre. Because TDK and Mark Pitternet, when you count games played, they're almost the same age in the terms of ruck avenues. And then Murkoff is waiting on. So genuinely how this works is you have an older guy, a TDK, and then a baby that you're trying to develop. So this is an area that maybe Carlton, I don't think will do. I can't think, maybe if Carlton get a Goldstein, I don't think they'll pay big cash for a ruckman is what I'm trying to say. But genuinely they could do, because then you could say, well, TDK, okay, we'll slot him in that key role and we'll give him a bit of forward time and really focus on that. But then the counter, they might say, right, Brodie Kemp can do that, and TDK does do very well at his intercepts. We'll have him as that auxiliary key defender. It's all them questions there that a list manager has. I'm trying to give you them questions that key managers have. So, very interesting that. So, an area. Now, this is probably the much talked about one. Now, what is interesting about this is there's some caveats to this. Now, I wasn't surprised about this, but a good mate of mine who's a Carlton pundit was. Jesse Motlop, in the basis of if you were doing a recruitment depth chart, kicks goals, but he also has the Matty Always tackle numbers as well. Second for inside 50 tackles per game is Motlop. And that is genuinely what you start to see. Genuinely, when you look in the last 10 years, like we say in the top four, their small forwards are 3 playing, right? And it works like this. 1 very defensive high tackles. 1 who doesn't tackle but kicks snags. And 3 a guy that can slot across half forward. Right? And be that interim and that conduit. He's a little bit taller. He's smarter than the average bear. Or he can pinch it elsewhere. I think this time next year, Owies may slip out. And it'll be Honey there. But I would like to see someone coming in here. Is my point. Someone coming in here. Because they need a bit of pressure. Now, whether that's someone older, like Jamie Cripps, to guide these players through. Whether that's someone younger, your hit rate in your 60s is incredibly high for this type of player. Problem is, there isn't 1,000 in the draft. But kind of makes it up to you there. So, the big thing for Carlton when we look at it is, with that, is all them best reserves, even if you start chopping and changing, are very injured players. And Carlton have got incredibly lucky to finish where they had, with probably very good selection decisions. But you can't dine out on that. So, definitely this year, Nick Austin has got a very hard job in the terms of acquiring the right talent. I would say if I was the list manager for Voss, I'm looking for players with very good kicking stats. Or I'm looking for older players. I get the impression that for Nick Austin, he's got it easy in the terms of that they don't have to be best 22 either. They have to be them. At worst, they're guys that are going to be best reserve players. If you look at Carlton this year, a lot of all Australians, more than a lot of players, which is a huge worry if you're the list manager. If I was Nick Austin, that would worry me that I had nearly as many as Geelong. But we finished 9th and they finished 1st. Because that would say to me that the next cabs off the rank aren't as good as Geelong. And that's a big issue. Because you need your superstars, but you also need your big base players. So Austin's made some tough decisions. He's got rid of a lot of the riffraff. Now he's got to go that next level. And I predict that you may see, I'd imagine you'll see Marchbank rookied at the very least. Cunners, Setterfield and Fogarty, if he can get some trade value for Setterfield, not against him going. As we saw that's a very depthy position for us. If we can get someone in like a Hustwaite who could play now, but he's got the talent, that is a big question for him. And Fogarty, if he is stayed, you would imagine that you might as well get a kid in. Do you know what I mean? A kid. Because I don't think he's going to get any better. But a lot of questions there. And as we can see, if we just bring that list back up, you've got a lot of players there as well that are in contract that probably in that depth chart, do you need them? Do you need them? So, very, very interesting, I thought. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope that gives you some indication there of what we may need and how we do it. But very excited to do some more draft work. Drop your questions. Send them on Twitter, Facebook. I'm always around. But until next time, much love. Pom out.